Hey, welcome back. Fantasy Focus Football is presented by Geico. Switch to Geico and see all the ways you could save. It is Tuesday, August 2nd. Field and Daniel hanging out. What's going on, partner?
Hey, buddy. Did you?
Why did I just throw a cowboy inflection?
I don't know.
What's going on, partner? Well, I guess.
I guess I know why, but I'm not sure that I liked it is what I want to say about it.
No joke, I did not do that because we are talking about the Dallas Cowboys on today's show.
I felt like I believe you. I think that was like an accidental thing in the back of your brain. It just sort of came up.
You know what? I channeled my inner Tim Band McMahon. If anybody here listens to the Hoop Collective podcast or the Low Post podcast, Tim McMahon, one of our NBA reporters, often opens up by saying, "Howdy, partner."
Howdy, partner.
And he's got that Dallas, Houston, I'm not exactly sure where in Texas he's from originally, twang, and I just invoked the great Tim McMahon. We're talking about football today. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
People are like, shut up with your accents. Just keep talking.
I'm great at accents.
We will. I know you. You probably are.
No, I'm not. I'm
really?
I'm very much not. I'm very poor at them. The one thing I'm not allowed to do is accents at home. Rosie always tells me that they're just too awful.
Okay.
So.
But you have a really good, well, I guess we always joke.
It's an old-timey prospector. Like, that's all
you
I
ever
can
do.
Yeah.
Right. Limited range. Yeah. Limited range. So today we're going to talk about the Cowboys and the Commanders as the first edition of our Double Trouble. Last year, we even got to Triple Trouble when we were fairly productive and efficient on shows. Maybe one day we'll be back into Triple Trouble, but a reminder, podcast is back.
That's right.
And if you listen to the audio version, awesome. Thank you. I think we're supposed to say, make sure to rate and review, give us 5 stars wherever you get your podcast, right?
That sounds like the plan, yeah.
Did that correctly?
I've heard people say that before.
And if you want to watch, where can you do that?
YouTube. You can watch us on ESPN.
Yeah.
You can watch us on Twitter.
Yep.
You can watch us on the ESPN Fantasy Facebook page.
Okay.
And you can follow at Mama Dopp, and she'll tweet out all the other places that you can find the podcast because she has been directing and corralling Fantasy Focus fans to make sure that they can find the podcast wherever that we're at.
And a good reminder, the Fantasy Focus handle, at Fantasy Focus on Twitter, also a great resource. Jackson, who crushes it on that handle, has the full controls of it, does a great job, not just distributing content, but show announcements and things like that, polls. And we are trying to make YouTube a thing this year. It's not like this is not fetch. We are trying to make it happen, but are going to do so successfully that YouTube chat seems to be a fruitful way to get people involved. We took some questions at the end of the show yesterday. We'll do some again today. So for those that also missed yesterday's show, Fantasy Football Marathon, 2 weeks from now, we'll be about halfway through.
Yeah.
Monday, August 15th to Tuesday, August 16th. A lot of the stuff that you've seen in the past, tons of rankings conversations. We're going to do a Fantasy Football Now special. We're going to be doing a draft, which is usually the way that we conclude the event.
I love the draft.
Big draft. We'll have some of ESPN's best and brightest stars as part of that, which will be really fun. More information to come over the next couple of weeks. But today, we begin Double Trouble. And before we get into it, and you'll hear the drop in just a second, what is Double Trouble, Daniel?
Double Trouble means that we're going to talk about 2 different teams per day as we go through the preseason to be able to let everybody know how we are looking at both, the Cowboys. Today's the Cowboys and the Commanders, but we're just breaking down team by team. What do we think about these guys from a fantasy perspective?
And what's fun about Double Trouble, there are a lot of fun things, but there are players that probably aren't anywhere close to like the real hardcore fantasy, the real fantasy radar for like 10-team teams, right? Yep. 10-team leagues. 160 players are drafted. You may not have the bandwidth to have studied the Cowboys' 4th wide receiver. Double Trouble is like our space to mention those names that they may amount to nothing, but every once in a while, actually more than every once in a while, there is a breakthrough star in fantasy football that no one was talking about during the preseason. So without further ado, it is time now for Double Trouble.
Double Trouble.
Double trouble.
Double Trouble. Double Trouble.
As of this moment, they're on double secret probation.
All right, so we're going to start with the Cowboys. Interesting team this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting in a lot of ways. Usually we start with the quarterback, so let's dive in on the quarterback, Daniel. And Mike Clay is most optimistic on Dak Prescott. We discussed this a bit in a recent projections conversation.
Yep.
He's got him at 6. I've got him at 10. His current quarterback ADP is 8th. So where are you at on Dak Prescott? Like for at least a couple of years, when he's healthy, Dak Prescott has been an elite fantasy quarterback.
He has been.
Before he got hurt 2 years ago, he was on pace to shatter the NFL passing yardage record. Last year, he was pretty darn good for fantasy as well. Where are you at?
So I think he's definitely a QB1, just to start right off the bat. There's a little bit of range in there if you want to talk about between QB6, QB10-ish, but he is a QB1 if I leave my fantasy draft with Dak as my starting quarterback, I'm okay with it. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I think Dak actually, I'm more on Mike's side than I am on, I think, the lower end of the QB1 side, because I think Dak this year gets healthy, fully healthy, coming back. Last year, he had a big dip in rushing, huge dip in rushing. And I think that generally contributed to why it is that he scored less points. He was more boom bust because of that. That being said, he threw 40 touchdowns. Yeah. I mean, the Cowboys were the second highest scoring fantasy points team in the league.
Yeah.
If you tell me that there's only one other team that scores more fantasy points over the entire season than the Dallas Cowboys, then I'm going to assume that Dak Prescott is a major contributor to getting them all of those fantasy points.
All right, so I have him at quarterback 10, which I think is lowest amongst our rankers. If not, it's amongst the lowest. Again,
why are you wrong, though, Field?
I'm not wrong. Here's the reason why. So the reasons why he's moved down a couple of pegs for me, I think, are fairly straightforward. So as of right now, the Cowboys' proven wide receivers that we think will be available for week 1 are CeeDee Lamb, and that's it. We'll talk about James Washington in just a bit. We'll talk about Michael Gallup in just a bit. Injuries are a concern right now for the Cowboys wideouts. Amari Cooper was traded. So there are less reliable pass catchers around for Dak Prescott. And any quarterback is better when they've got really good players around them.
Totally.
Even Tom Brady, right? Like, it helps to have some help.
Yep.
So the weapons are inferior this year compared to where they were last year. You mentioned the rushing. He averaged just 9.1 rushing yards per game.
That's awful.
Now, part of that may have been tied to the fact that he had a calf injury for a lot of the year. He's also 2 years removed from a massive ankle injury. And whereas someone like Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen or Kyler Murray, if they get hurt, I expect them on the other side of that injury to rush a comparable amount because they're just so unique at it. At his best, Dak was no doubt a good, maybe even a very good running quarterback. But no one ever classified Dak Prescott as a scrambler or a designed runner like we do Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Kyler Murray, right?
Totally. Yep.
So it wouldn't surprise me if the Cowboys, who are trying to protect Dak Prescott, say, it's okay if we don't have a bunch of designed runs for you. And it's just really hard to predict quarterback rushing touchdowns near the goal line, especially when you have two capable running backs. So I'm a little bit down on Dak, even if I still have him inside or right at the cusp of my top 10. Those are the reasons why I'm a little bit down on him. I still like him, and you made the right point. If I walk away with Dak as my quarterback, I'm feeling fine about that. But there are some other players that just rose above Dak in my mind going into this season, either due to a change of scenery like Russell Wilson or somebody like Joe Burrow, who exploded late last year.
Sure. And that is a thing. I totally understand all of those concerns, and you have to be able to see it from Dak to be able to know it's going to be a little bit more consistent this season. So understand all of that, but we are all on the same page here. Dak is a QB1. If you leave your draft with him, you're not frustrated about it. You're okay with it.
You feel good about it. That much is for sure. I just think that with these quarterbacks, it's not just whether you draft them or not. It's also where you draft them.
Totally.
And I think that's going to be one of the interesting conversations this year is I think the middle class of quarterbacks is actually really strong. Like generally on ESPN.com's ADP, you're going to see the top tier quarterbacks, which this year are considered Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen in terms of where they are being drafted, is like so far above every other quarterback that it just doesn't prove worthwhile to me to make that investment with like the 21st pick on Josh Allen. But that middle class of quarterbacks, like maybe even from like 5 to 12, and for those watching right now, you see 6 through 11, Jalen Hurts to Russell Wilson. It's actually a pretty good sweet spot. Like all those guys have massive upside, but you're drafting them in like maybe the 7th round, maybe the 8th round, maybe the 9th round. And that right there is a perfectly appropriate spot for a quarterback.
Absolutely.
Let's talk Zeke.
Okay.
This is a tricky one. Zeke Elliott, based off of the first 3 to 4 seasons of his career, was trending towards a no doubt about it fantasy football Hall of Fame career.
Absolutely.
He was arguably the best player in fantasy as a rookie, maintained some really, really ridiculous production for the next couple of seasons. But Zeke Elliott is a different man right now, Daniel. And the days of us debating whether he deserved to be the first overall pick, whether he deserved to be a first-round pick, seem to be behind us. But how far has Zeke fallen in the fantasy pantheon? Is he still a player that you expect to be a weekly starter in your lineup?
I think so. Mm-hmm. And weekly starter, when I hear that, I think he's still, for me, a low-end RB2.
Okay.
That's where I'm drafting him.
Yep.
But even if he's not a low-end RB2, I think that you can absolutely use him as a flex play with where he should be drafted. Zeke, last year, was RB7 overall on a just total points basis. But when you look at on a points per game basis, he was RB16, only averaged 14.8 points per game. That consistency was just so maddening for fantasy players because, like you said, when you draft Ezekiel Elliott, you're expecting a certain level of production from him, and you didn't see that last year. Yeah. I think that Zeke does take a step forward. I do think that he will be slightly more productive this year. I think that maybe the hate has gone a little bit too far, especially to your point. If the Dallas Cowboys early on in the season don't have the receiving core that they need to, is it possible that they lean on the running backs? And that could also include Tony Pollard. However, I think that Zeke is at least a low-end RB2, and I think that if you leave a draft with him there, I'm definitely okay with it. But I do think the hate has gone a little far. He might be closer to RB15 for me.
All right, so let's go through sort of the pros and cons of Zeke that I think make this an interesting conversation. The cons might be easier just because I think there's
easy to look at.
Well, no, people are a little bit off the scent here on Zeke, is that he may not be the same player that he was early in his career. His yards per carry during his first 4 seasons, 5.1, 4.1, that was a little bit of a down season yards per carry wise. Then 4.7, 4.5. Okay.
Yep.
And in each of those years, his total touches was so significant. There was the suspension at one point, of course, as well. Over the past 2 years, 4.0 and 4.2 last season for Zeke. So there seems to be some signs that he's slowing down a little bit in terms of explosiveness. Okay. Last year, he also had 16.7 touches per game. He had at least 19.5 in his 5 prior seasons. So we saw, somewhere like a 15 to 20% decrease in workload. And we'll talk about Tony Pollard and what he means in that conversation. And then there's the fact that early in his career, Zeke was playing behind what many believe was the best offensive line in the NFL.
Very definitely.
It is, listen, I think it's still a solid offensive line with some pieces, especially if their first round pick pans out, maybe sooner than later. But this is not a dominant offensive line like it was early in his career. Those are the cons. The pros for Zeke is that not only did he have nearly 17 touches per game last season, that's as low as it's ever gone in his career, is that he's still he is a talented guy. I know that about that. And Zeke can hold up over the course of the season. He has been extremely durable, which for running backs in fantasy, super hard to find.
Yep.
People are sitting there saying oh yeah, Christian McCaffrey, amongst others that have had those issues in the past.
He's got a workhorse body.
Now, there's also this, and this is, make of this what you will, but recently, on Saturday, it's Tuesday right now, Jerry Jones, who is unlike any other owner in the NFL because he has a massive influence on this roster in so many ways, said, this is a quote, "Zeke's got to be our feature, and he is our feature. We can feature him in a lot of different ways. We all recognize what he does in the passing game because of his protection ability. Don't ever underestimate that, especially with Zeke. Zeke takes some tolls when he's out there as a back blocking, so it's critical that we make Zeke, because he's capable of being that, really the focus of what we're doing. Now then, Pollard, there's plenty of room for Pollard. There's plenty of room for Pollard when Zeke's in there. Pollard needs to get the ball." So at least in the first, here's why that quote is important to me. And trust me, we've seen a million quotes where coaches say something and something else proves to be the truth.
Sure.
But I think it reinforces when there is this choir of people saying, more Tony Pollard. It reinforces that Zeke's role will still be prominent, and that the fear of this flipping, where Pollard's the guy and Zeke is the change of pace, that does not exist.
Yeah.
So I'm confident there's a workhorse role here for Zeke, less efficient than seasons past, and it's possible that his new reality is more like 16.7 touches per game like it was last season, as opposed to trending back towards 20.
So is that 16.7 touches per game over the course of a full season just a less sexy, lower your expectations? He's just not the Zeke that he used to be. But if you tell me Zeke's had at least 8 touchdowns and 1,200 scrimmage yards in all 6 years of his career, if I said you can get an RB2 that's going to get you at least 8 touchdowns and 1,200 yards from scrimmage, you'd be like, okay. Yeah. If I said that was Zeke, you might feel like that's underperforming based on what you know of Ezekiel Elliott, but maybe that's what we need to know. Like maybe this is the new Zeke that we need to prepare for.
The new Zeke Elliott is that the upside is not what it was in the past, but the downside may not be nearly as scary as it often feels like it is, because we're just a few years removed from him being in the conversation for the best player in fantasy.
And we got to move on because we've been talking about Zeke for a minute, but $18 million cap hit. Like how much, just from a take fantasy out of it, from an NFL standpoint, does the fact that he's paid a lot of money over the next couple of years and it's hard for the Cowboys to get out factor into Jerry Jones saying that about Zeke?
Oh, trust me, Jerry wants good on those investments. This is the last year where his contract is super immovable. Very interesting conversation next year. Tony Pollard, really interesting conversation this year. He checks in at RB 33 in ESPN consensus ranks, coming off of a career high 11.3 touches per game. I think that Tony Pollard will have a slightly larger role this year, Daniel, but I'm not convinced, based off some of the things that Jerry Jones has said and the skill set of Zeke Elliott, that it's going to be a massively larger role. So what do you make of the value?
I like him as a flex, like a low-end flex play, potentially for bye weeks. I think that, listen, we watched Tony Pollard be really explosive and be really good.
Yeah.
And in an offense where they're going to be without a lot of skill position players to start the season, I would think that they would find ways to manufacture some touches for both of these running backs, Tony Pollard included, and finding a way to get him involved. That being said, like we just had the Zeke conversation, I don't think that they're not going to just hand the keys to him unless Ezekiel Elliott gets hurt. He's never going to be that full-time guy here. He's always going to be the number 2 running back, and so he's going to have to develop way more of a pass-catching role to be a full-time flex play for me, I think.
Yeah, and the hard part about flex plays, we tend to lean towards
wide receivers
in general, or a great tight end if you have 2 of them. So he's not going to be an obvious flex play in a lot of weeks. Last year, even with an expanded role, he had 9 games under 10 fantasy points. So what Tony Pollard strikes me as is one of the best insurance policies in the NFL, and a guy that good running back depth, right? Like you're going to have some thin weeks where bye weeks are going to catch up to you or injuries catch up to you. And I'll live with the opportunity that Tony Pollard could get me 15 fantasy points every once in a while.
And I think, when I say flex play, I'm thinking of those. I'm specifically thinking not early season. Like you're in the throes of bye weeks and you need someone that you know is going to be out there on the field participating and not just a dart throw to say, boy, I hope this guy gets 7 targets. Like at least Tony Pollard, will be involved in this Cowboys offense.
Yeah, and by the way, like whatever Jerry is saying right now, like that could change once, rubber meets the road and they're playing games. Like if Tony Pollard's way better as a player this year, like the damage is done financially to Zeke. Like you're paying him no matter what. Like
Jerry Jones wants to win football games.
Yeah, so there's a chance that Tony Pollard has a much improved season this year just because he's a good, talented young player. It just feels like that Zeke wall is a real one. It's not something that we can, no matter what we say, we can just break down on our own.
Yep.
Talk wide receivers.
Oof.
Shall we?
Yes.
What do you think? CeeDee Lamb.
I think he is going to see true wide receiver 1 volume.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Dak being able to come back and be the quarterback that is not the boomer bust quarterback that he was last year is going to be really big a part of that.
Yep.
To me, CeeDee Lamb is a guy that I'm probably taking in the 2nd round of my fantasy drafts. He's not a guy I'm looking at in the 1st round. But if you're looking at locking up a wide receiver 1 in one of the most fantasy-friendly offenses in the NFL, CeeDee Lamb is primed to take a leap forward without Amari Cooper there. It is not just he's going to keep doing what he did last year. He has a shot to take the next step here, and you can get him with, I think, pretty decent value. You're looking at, probably mid-2nd round for CeeDee Lamb.
I was a year too early on CeeDee Lamb. I got really excited last year. I couldn't contain myself. I had him as sort of the breakout player in fantasy football. He was good.
He was good.
He was good.
Yes.
This could be the year, though, where we see the true CeeDee Lamb.
Yep.
So just accounting for Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson, who signed with the Dolphins, the Cowboys vacated 165 wide receiver targets.
Wow.
As of right now, and a hat tip to Kyle Yeomans, hopefully I'm pronouncing that last name correctly on Twitter, he noted yesterday that the only active wide receiver on the Cowboys roster, meaning healthy, like participating in training camp, with an NFL receiving touchdown is CeeDee Lamb.
No way.
He has a massive opportunity, does CeeDee Lamb. His chance to potentially challenge for 10 targets per game is real. The talent we know is real as well. He's made no shortage of dazzling catches in his career. The talent is potentially special. And this team, even if they are opportunistic on defense, the NFL is just far too pass heavy, too many Sundays to discount the possibility of the Cowboys being a throw first and throw often team. CeeDee Lamb going inside the top 15 picks is not going to surprise me one bit. I have a few more running backs near the top of my draft board, but CeeDee Lamb has all the elements here to be a guy that finishes a top 5 wide receiver.
True breakout potential here with him in this season. I am totally with you. On that standpoint, though, Field, when we're talking about CeeDee Lamb, part of that has to do with the fact that you've got 3 wide receivers behind him. Actually, all 3 of them right now are sort of banged up.
They're all hurt, yeah.
Michael Gallup, James Washington, and Jalen Tolbert. So can we dive into those 3 and how, those are tough to be able to figure out when you're drafting in fantasy too, with the way that things have been shaken out right now.
It is. I think there's one that piques my interest in a 10-team league, or obviously a 12-team or larger league. Yes, maybe all of them are on the radar in some way, shape, or form. Probably not James Washington. For those that missed the news yesterday, he suffered a foot injury. He's going to be out, according to Todd Archer, 6 to 10 weeks.
Yep.
Do the math. That gets you into potentially October at some point. That's tough to expect a guy to come back at that point with a foot injury and make a massive splash. He's a solid player, but
he'll make a better NFL splash at that point than he will a fantasy splash.
Yeah. But Michael Gallup's the one that has piqued my interest, right? Because Michael Gallup is not realistically going to play in week 1, according to Michael Gallup himself. Tore his ACL on January 3rd of this year. So even if it's a 9-month recovery, that's sometime in September. You're going to have to wait for Michael Gallup to see the field. But what was the thing we always talked about with Michael Gallup prior to this, I guess, this year upon us? It was Michael Gallup could be so good if he got more opportunities.
He just had the chance.
And we saw some flashes last year. He had some games where he was really good.
Yes.
He played in 7 full games last year. He had 7 targets or more in 5 of those 7. The Cowboys did feature him. They also paid him 5 years and up to $62.5 million coming off of an ACL tear. They love this guy too. He has my interest peaked. You're going to have to be patient. I'm going to try to resist calling 9,000 receivers late round flyers in fantasy this year because we had so many of them. But Michael Gallup is a later round value that if you can afford to be patient, could end up being a weekly top 30 play for me, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit.
Right.
Super talented, potentially pass-heavy offense, very good quarterback. And after him, it's question marks at wide receiver.
Right now, Michael Gallup is going as wide receiver 65.
And listen, it's hard because who's going 55 and 56 and 57, et cetera. There are a lot of guys who sort of cross off a lot of the same lines in the to-do list that Michael Gallup does, but this guy's just really, really talented.
A couple
He
guys.
interests me.
I just got to say this really, I would take Michael Gallup over George Pickens, who's ahead of him. I would take Michael Gallup over Julio Jones, who's ahead of him.
Yeah.
I would take him over Jamison Williams from the Lions. Jamison Williams as a rookie is not going to come back until midseason, and then he's still got I definitely would take Michael Gallup. There's definitely a handful of guys here that I think when you look at that value, great late round flyer if you can get him.
Maybe a better value than I think I'm realizing, because I'm with you there. Those are some of the names that I would also take Michael Gallup ahead of. Dalton Schultz had a breakout year last year. And I think people in some ways poo-pooed it. They're like, dude, still Dalton Schultz. Where had he been the previous 3 years? Well, he was actually pretty good in 2020. Wasn't great, but he was pretty good in 2020.
Yep.
And I went into this year when I was doing my earliest round of rankings thinking, I'm sure Dalton Schultz is going to have to take a little bit of a hit in his value because at the time the Cowboys still had Amari Cooper. There was a whole offseason ahead of us. Who knows what they could have done at wide receiver?
Yep.
I'm starting to think that Dalton Schultz has a chance to borderline repeat his production last year. He was tight end 5 in points per game. And I say borderline because I'm not quite that rosy in terms of my outlook, but he's a legit, I think I have him at tight end 7.
Yep.
I think this year though, you can make the case that the cutoff point in terms of trustable tight ends is tight end 8 or 9. But if there's a Mendoza line of tight ends you can trust, Dalton Schultz is above it. I
Yes,
think he's in
agreed.
for a huge opportunity here.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. 11 games last year with 10-plus fantasy points. If you're telling me that I can lock up a tight end right now, he's going in the 7th round. If I can get a tight end in the 7th round that's going to give me double-digit fantasy points on a consistent basis, yes, with that positional scarcity and the fact that he is going to continue to have options in this offense. Dalton Schultz wasn't, correct me if I'm wrong here, he wasn't supposed to be the guy, right? Who was the other tight end that Dallas had that they wanted to be?
They had Blake Jarwin. Who's, unfortunately, injuries got the best of him.
And so, like, that's been a part of this. Like, Dalton Schultz has really found, like, he has been able to take advantage of a lot of these options. And I think that with him stepping forward this year, man, I think he has a chance to be a top 5 tight end.
So I've made this error in the past, and I hope that I'm learning from my previous sins with tight ends, is that I have sometimes fallen for the allure of big play potential, touchdowns, and highlight plays.
Sure.
David Njoku, Noah Fant, Jonnu Smith last year.
Yep.
Those are examples of guys. And I think if you were to, like, if you overvalue Hunter Henry this year, it could be, and I think he's a really good player, the best of all those that I've laid out, but he had so many touchdowns last year and not a ton of catches. If I'm going to chase a tight end target who's not Waller, Kelsey, Kittle, those types, Kyle Pitts, I'm chasing targets and opportunities.
Yes.
And Dalton Schultz, I think, has probably as good of a path to where he was last year, 75 catches, as any tight end that's not part of like that elite 5 or so that we are often talking about at tight ends. Like, huge opportunity here because the Cowboys need him. And I don't even care about 5 touchdowns. Like, if he gets 5, great. If he gets 10, even better.
Awesome.
I would hope it's 5, right? But like 75 catches is what stands out to me from last year. I want to go back to that well this season.
Agreed.
Anything else in the Cowboys that you wanted to mention? I only have one last thought.
Jalen Tolbert, is he worth drafting in a 10 to 12 team league with all the injuries at wide receiver to start?
I'm not there yet. I think I'd have to see more.
We'll see as it develops over.
Does he, like in the preseason? I know they are kind of play a lot, but if it's like, yeah, he's running with the ones on every snap that Dak Prescott is in there, maybe. But for now, off my radar.
Okay.
Last thing I'll say: if you're out there, you're thinking about taking the Cowboys defense early, don't do it. Just don't do it. That's no disrespect to the Cowboys, but what did Trevon Diggs have? Like 5 straight games to begin the year last year with a return touchdown and an interception.
It's not going to happen again.
Don't ever draft the Cowboys. Don't ever draft any defense, the Cowboys or otherwise. Let's move forward here to the Commanders. But before we do that, Daniel, let's talk to our friends at NerdWallet. Because when it comes to choosing the top running back, wide receiver, quarterback, even which defense is right for your team on any given week, you know where to turn. But when you're trying to decide on the right credit card for your wallet, the right mortgage lender for your dream home, or the right savings account, where do you go? The nerds at NerdWallet are here to help you make a smart financial decision. NerdWallet is a personal finance site run by money nerds. Think people as obsessed about personal finance as all of us are about fantasy points or fantasy sports in general, who want to share their knowledge with our listeners to help them find the right financial products for them. Let's say you're looking for a new rewards credit card. NerdWallet can help you compare cashback cards side by side. You can feel confident choosing the one that suits your spending. Think of this like your weekly wide receiver PPR rankings, but you're comparing top credit cards that work for you. Ready to make a financial decision? Compare and find top credit cards, savings accounts, and more at nerdwallet.com. NerdWallet, the smartest decision for all your financial decisions. NerdWallet, compare, Inc., NMLS 1617539. NerdWallet is not an investment advisor nor an investment broker. Information is for educational purposes only.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would, right? After all, who doesn't love a great deal? And when it comes to great rates on insurance for all things in life, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, your motorcycle, boat, and RV. They can even help with your homeowner's, condo, or renter's coverage. You could save even more with a special discount when you bundle your coverages. Plus, add the easy-to-use Geico mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more. And choosing to switch to Geico becomes a very easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways that you could save with great rates and discounts. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com to get a rate quote or contact your local agent and get started seeing how much you could save. Field, here's a thing that happened that we were supposed to do before that live read. we were supposed to say Caesars has the Cowboys with 10 wins this football season.
Okay.
I'm curious, over under. You take an over under 10 wins for the Dallas
I'll take
Cowboys.
over. I think the number probably is appropriately, I think 10 and a half, but I would take the over here.
I would take the over as well.
Yeah, the division, you could have 4 games that you win in your division. You could split the Eagles series and be halfway there.
Right.
Tough schedule to start for the Cowboys. Bucks right away in week 1, but I like the Cowboys to go a little over 10 wins.
I agree. I'm with you there.
A lot of pressure, though, on that team. If
Yes, there
things
is.
don't go early, have you heard that Mike McCarthy might be under some pressure?
Might he be?
Might be, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Did you know that Sean Payton does not coach anymore?
no, I didn't know that.
Right. And he's from Dallas, or at least coached there and
Oh,
lives
has
there.
he?
It's weird how these things are all just sort of happening right now.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Is this your windy moment? Do you want?
How legendary was
No, it was pretty legendary.
that? I love Brian Windhorst.
Me too.
Just so you know, Windy.
He is amazing. I love
One
taking
of the
that.
nicest
He's so great.
people here at ESPN and deserves all the shine. Wendy, you're the man. I am not going to try to steal your thunder because often imitated, never
duplicated. That's right. That's right. We love you, buddy. All right. Let's talk about these Commanders.
Yeah.
Field. I think the biggest thing that this entire team has a new quarterback, Carson Wentz, and everything changes when you have a new quarterback under center.
Yep.
I'm just curious, philosophically, big picture, how do the Commanders look with Carson Wentz under center rather than somebody like Taylor Heineke from last year?
Yeah, I think a little better. A little more structure, a little more stability. And I know that Carson Wentz is far from a great player. He has been traded twice in the past 2 seasons and for a reason.
Yep.
But I think speaking generally, if you gave me the chance to have Carson Wentz or Taylor Heineke run my offense, I'd prefer Carson Wentz, knowing there's some limitations. But I think this is good news for the wide receivers and the pass catchers in general for the Washington offense.
Absolutely.
Wentz is not on the 10-team radar, the 12-team radar, probably even the 14-team radar for me. While I have noted that a lot of our content is going to be tied to 10-team leagues, anybody out there listening or watching right now, you have my word here. We are going to do at least one episode where we talk about 2 quarterback leagues and sort of give you an idea, or / superflex leagues, because I've heard people say, well, what about Carson Wentz superflex leagues? Well, he'll be drafted because basically every quarterback is drafted, but we're going to give you some of that content, so stand by for that. But as far as Carson Wentz's like individual fantasy impact is concerned, there's just not enough of a ceiling. We saw it last year. Like he has a reasonable floor. He had 10 games with 17 plus fantasy points last year. That's good.
Yeah.
But if you're chasing a 25-point effort, that's going to be fleeting from Carson Wentz. He's an okay runner, but not a consistent running threat. And I think this team philosophically would like to be one that controls the line of scrimmage and runs the football effectively.
Agreed. Okay. Even with that being said, though, right, all of these things we're saying about Carson Wentz, not somebody that we would look at in 10 or 12-team leagues, still feel fairly safe to say that this is potentially the best quarterback that Terry Mclaurin has played with so far in Washington. Is that fair?
I think so, and especially if he reverts back to form. And, Carson Wentz has sort of been through – people are going to take issue with me saying the ringer because Carson Wentz doesn't exactly, endear himself for, all this praise, right? There was some up and down moments in those last couple of years in Philly and questions about the locker room and things like that. But, he's been traded twice. At one point, he was in the MVP conversation early in his career. It has not gone as planned for Carson Wentz.
Yep.
I think there's a little bit different pressure here in Washington. Yes, they traded him, but all of a sudden the amount of money he's making is nowhere. It's like 15th or 20th for quarterbacks. He's not a massive salary anymore. No one is sitting here casting him as a potential Pro Bowl player. I think the pressure is off. I think that's good things. So, yes, I believe this is the best quarterback play that Terry McLaurin will have had in his career.
Boy, I agree with that too. Part of me wants to know, and I'm not trying to just ask you questions for follow-up, but so I agree with that. And my thought process has been, what does that mean for me as I've been going through drafts? Because Terry McLaurin, I think, is one of the first wide receiver ones from a really questionable offense that I've been put with some difficult decisions on of would I rather have Terry McLaurin or would I rather have maybe a number 2 from a better offense? So I'm curious, when you look at Terry McLaurin, obviously better quarterback play, do you see him as a full-on wide receiver 2? Is he more of a flex play with Carson Wentz under center?
No, I think he's a really solid wide receiver too. I've got him at wide receiver 18 in my rankings, but a reminder that wide receiver is so deep this year that they're going to be guys outside my top 20 that I have implicit confidence in.
You could
I would
start every week
in a 10-team league with
Yep.
2 wide receivers only. So back-to-back years with at least 75 catches, at least 1,000 receiving yards for Terry McLaurin. I believe there's enough of a quarterback upgrade that what we saw last year is not going to be as much of an issue this year. He had 12 weeks last year, 12, where he wasn't even a top 30 wideout.
Yeah.
Taylor Heineke was fun. He had some, Ryan Fitzpatrick kind of YOLO moments, but just an inconsistent player relative to your average starting quarterback. So I think that the stability of Carson Wentz will help. I think the fact that going into this season, I think the offense looks better on paper will help. And I think that there's some others around him to help will also be a big boost for Terry McLaurin.
I totally agree.
We'll talk about Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson more in a second, but just the idea that last year, if you're a defense and you're just saying like, we'll take 17 away and we'll be fine. You can't beat us without him. By the way, no Logan Thomas last year either for much of the season. So I think Terry McLaurin is just like a really strong wide receiver too. I'm going to put this on the offensive staff in Washington the same way that we'll do when we talk about the Seahawks in Seattle and their offensive system with DK Metcalf is like, it must be a priority to manifest somewhere between 7 and 10 targets every game for Terry McLaurin. Like, it's got to be priority number one. He's too good. He's too good down the field. He's too good as a run-after-catch player. It needs to happen. I believe it will. I think he's a strong wide receiver, too.
Love it. I think I'm with you. I just also hope that Carson Wentz takes the next step forward. I would love it if he was, like, I feel like there's so much left on the field with Terry McLaurin because of quarterback play. And there's nothing against quarterback play, but I would love to see Carson Wentz really be able to unlock what Terry McLaurin can be in this offense.
We just need volume. Like, we don't need great quarterback play. We've seen it with Allen Robinson, his past, right? Like, never had a great quarterback to play with, but has had some elite fantasy seasons. I just need volume for Terry McLaurin.
All right, so let's talk about Jahan Dodson then, because I feel like he's right now probably the number 2 that we're looking at there in that offense. Aside from Terry McLaurin, are you looking at drafting Jahan Dodson this year in redraft leagues as a rookie?
So maybe, and here's the maybe. I don't want to be wishy-washy, but as of right now, Curtis Samuel not 100% still, which is crazy given that he hurt his groin last preseason. Not like he tore his ACL or something. But it sounds like, I think Ron Rivera said, quote, his conditioning wasn't quite 100% recently or something to that effect. But Curtis Samuel not to be overlooked. If you're thinking to yourself, I remember that guy. That's because over his last, I think I had 8 games in 2020. Here's what Curtis Samuel did in terms of fantasy points. 17.3, 21.4, 26.8, 4.2, 21.4, 12.7, 8.8, 20.8, 19.1. 5 games in that stretch with at least 9 targets. He's a really talented player who's also super versatile. If he's healthy and he's playing, I don't see the role for Jahan Dotson strong enough to draft him in a 10-team league. If Curtis Samuel is unavailable, then Jahan Dotson has some interest to me. But if you're looking at some of these young wide receivers that we haven't seen before, Daniel, the common thread between those in recent years that have exploded, I'm not saying you're going to be Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or whoever, but it's either they play an elite passing offense, they have an elite quarterback. Obviously, you're an elite talent. You have to be to have massive numbers.
Yep.
Or you have both of those first 2 factors, elite passing offense, elite quarterback, which usually go hand in hand. I just don't think this offense is good enough. I don't think Carson Wentz is good enough to sustain 2 fantasy viable wide receivers, and definitely not 3. If there is a second, I think it's more likely to be Curtis Samuel because of the way that I think he'll be utilized and the potential for some rushing too.
I like that. Okay. That's a good breakdown. I actually don't have a whole lot to add, so I'm going to move on.
Why not? To one of the players that I have no idea.
Dude, we talked about this yesterday. I have such a hard time. All right, let's talk about Commanders running backs. J.D. McKissick is going to be their pass catcher.
Yep.
Antonio Gibson has been their guy. But then they drafted Brian Robinson.
Yep, 3rd-round pick out of Alabama for those unfamiliar. Power back, not like a pass catcher. He is kind of like a lot of the recent Alabama running backs, like strong like a bull.
Big between the tackles.
Talented between the tackles. Yep.
So Ron Rivera has said some things that have made me, from a fantasy perspective, not have the same kind of confidence in Antonio Gibson that I had last year.
You had some last year? Because I didn't.
Well,
I lost it quickly.
I lost it quickly last year because I started out thinking that he was going to be sort of like, I don't want to go back to it. Christian McCaffrey.
No, that's the thing. We have to dismiss that right off the bat. Is that the idea of Antonio Gibson as an elite pass catching running back in terms of volume? Bye-bye. Gone.
Like, I don't know how any of us in the fantasy industry were, I feel like, tricked into thinking that like this potentially could be what this guy's going to be in this offense, because that's just not the way that they utilized him.
Not the way they utilized him
at all
prior to J.D. McKissick's injury. Before McKissick got hurt, he had that serious neck / I think it was a stinger, maybe even a concussion. Gibson did not have more than 3 catches in a game. If you look at his total season stats last year, 73 of his 294 yards receiving came on 1 catch, which I know you can take away every player's big play, but that's like 25% of his receiving volume on 1 play. So let's start with that. Antonio Gibson is not, in terms of usage, an elite receiving back, even though he has very good receiving skill as a former wide receiver.
But Field, he is currently being drafted as RB22. And there is just a lot of mystery surrounding that running back room in Washington. So are you comfortable right now investing in Antonio Gibson at the spot where he's being drafted, RB22 right now?
Yeah, it's right in line with where I have him ranked, which is RB21. But I'll be honest with you. It's right around the spot where I start to not love the options at running back.
I agree.
The cutoff line's a little bit closer to 15 for me this year, where I'm like, I love that. Like, I'm in on that player, right? Like, I think he's due for a big season. But the mitigating factors for Antonio Gibson is, again, the lack of an elite passing game role, the fact that Brian Robinson's going to get some opportunities here. And I think that Washington, part of the motivation for drafting a running back in the 3rd round was that they hated the fact that Antonio Gibson had to play through a massive shin injury last year and that he had to manage that all season. I'm sure the counterpoint would be, well, hey, at least he's healthy this year. Yes, but Washington might be more likely, and this is a theme around the NFL, to say just because our guy's healthy doesn't mean we're going to drive him into the ground. It means that maybe we need to recognize that Derrick Henry's and Jonathan Taylor's are far more the exception than the rule. So I think it's a little bit like even if Brian Robinson gets 10% of the carries that Antonio Gibson got last year, or maybe it's more like 15 to 18 or 20%, plus the contributions in the passing game going to J.D. McKissick. The pathway for Antonio Gibson is going to be hoping for 15 plus carries per game and hoping that he has some good touchdown luck. And that's how I'll validate that low-end RB2 / high-end RB3 status.
As I have been going through drafts this offseason, I have started to realize that there are, as you said, there are certain lines that I have when it comes to certain positions. And if I get to Antonio Gibson and he is my RB2, it's not that I am disappointed. It's just that I did my draft wrong, I think, is the way that I look at that. Like, yeah. I feel like I wish then I would have gone with somebody that, like, there is so much question mark around the volume and what he's going to be, that for him to be my full-on RB2, that's tough for me. Yeah. That's tough for me. I would rather have some of those workhorse guys up front and fill in with how deep the wide receiver position is this year, as we've talked about over and over and over again. Yeah, I feel bad. Like, I don't want to crush someone who had 10 rushing touchdowns last year, but I just think that this is the first show of Double Trouble. We're going to talk about this a lot, but he's the first running back that we've discussed that's below that line. Maybe Zeke is kind of close to the cutoff point, right? Like RB17. I feel fine about Zeke. I don't feel he's not going to win me my league, but I feel fine about the opportunity here. 1,200 total yards every single season. It's going to happen every single year. All right, here's a question. Commanders right now have a win total of 8 from Caesars. Mm-hmm. That seems high to me. Over, under. Yeah, I'm going to take under only because Chase Young, their star pass rusher, probably not available to begin the season, according to Ron Rivera. And I just think that limitations offensively multiplied by a defense that took some time last year. Remember, it was always like, how is this defense not playing better? I'll go under 8 wins. I'm going to go under 8 wins as well. Just Logan Thomas. I know a lot of people are probably going to ask about him when it comes to tight ends. I think probably the concern is that, like, if we have 3 wide receivers that we expect to play a decent amount, plus J.D. McKissick, plus he's coming off of an injury, like, I don't know. Again, I was talking about, what are you chasing from tight ends? I'm just not sure the volume is elite enough there for me to feel really, really good about him as a potential upside play at tight end. We're going to come back and discuss do a little name game, actually, that involves a couple of the players that we have talked about already today. But first,
Is the news terrorizing your timeline, Daniel?
Yep.
Is the Supreme Court causing your anxiety to rise higher than gas prices? Yep. Is the whole world feeling as unpredictable as cryptocurrency?
Yep.
Hey, you're not alone. Charlemagne the God is here to help. I mean, not really. There's nothing he can do. He's just one man, despite his name. But you can watch his show, Comedy Central's Hell of a Week. He'll be chopping it up with the best and brightest comedians, political figures, and cultural influencers to talk you through the unapologetically honest takes as he tackles issues rooted in politics and culture on this late-night talk show. Hell may be hot, but Charlemagne the God's takes are even hotter. He's dishing you up pure honesty with a heavy helping of comedy. Come get the week's last laugh with Charlemagne the God, because if you're living in the same world he is, it's been a hell of a week. Seriously. Comedy Central's Hell of a Week with Charlemagne the God. Thursday at 11:30, 10:30 Central, starting July 28th. That was last week on Comedy Central, TV 14.
Get in on the hottest sports action for your shot at cold, hard cash with DraftKings Sportsbook. Bet on your favorite sports all summer long and gear up for football season. Right now, new customers can get a risk-free bet up to $1,000. Just make your first bet up to $1,000, and if it doesn't hit, you'll get another shot at a big win. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code FFF. Make your first deposit and get a risk-free bet of up to $1,000. That's a $1,000 risk-free bet. It's promo code FFF only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details.
Alrighty. So we do this thing called a name game here. If you're unfamiliar, the idea is actually really simple, Daniel. What we do is we start with one name. In this case, it'll be Zeke to start, and we run through other names, and you get to choose which of them you prefer. That's very complicated, huh?
No, it's super simple.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure. For those that are new here, I'm going to continue with this theme of like, introducing some old elements.
If you had to pick, because normally we have music, if you had to pick one of these bands to like be behind us, which one would you want to be the music underneath our name game? Valley Heart, Manchester Orchestra?
Probably Manchester Orchestra, because you wore the T-shirt of them yesterday.
I did do that. All right.
So
Manchester Orchestra, this one's for you
strong
guys.
contender. But I think we have a drop for the name game.
We do. We
We
sure
don't.
We're doing it live,
Oh,
guys.
we're doing it live. So we're doing a name game. That was a game preview edition of name game.
That's all right. Let's get into it with Zeke.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So Ezekiel Elliott right now, ESPN ADP 18.
Yep.
We talked about Antonio Gibson. Would you rather have Zeke or Antonio Gibson?
Give me Zeke. I mentioned that just a little while ago in our conversation, but I just think that superior player and better opportunity for scoring touchdowns and a better offense.
All right. What about Zeke or Saquon Barkley, hoping to look better in this new Giants offense?
I don't think I'm going to be right on Saquon Barkley, but I'm just nervous. Too many injury concerns. Don't believe this offense is going to be great, and we'll see whether or not he's as involved in the passing game, but I think he needs to be to pay off as an RB2.
All right. What about David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears? Right now, ESPN ADP is our running back 16.
Yeah, I would think I'm taking him over Zeke Elliott because his volume, I think, will be similar as a runner. I think he'll have better volume as a receiver, too. Like, he plays on an offense that really needs, and I know that Zeke has needed this well, but they don't have, Khalil Herbert's a good backup running back. He's not Tony Pollard, right? Like, the opportunity for someone to take over meaningful touches,
correct,
like 11 per game where Tony Pollard was last year, is less likely in Chicago than it is for the Cowboys with Zeke Elliott. So David Montgomery, but I do have him 16, just one spot ahead of Zeke. So it's the slightest of preferences.
Sure. What about Breece Hall?
Yeah, I've got Zeke ahead of Breece Hall as well. I mentioned yesterday that really difficult schedule for Breece Hall coming out of the gates. And just that, until you see it, it's the Jets have good running backs besides him. Like, they have Michael Carter, who's really good in the passing game. They brought back Tevin Coleman for whatever that is, or they have Tevin Coleman, I should say. He also was recently activated, I believe, from the NFI list. So I give Zeke the edge over Breece Hall, but Breece Hall certainly has a positive long-term outlook.
I'm going to throw a wrench in here because this is not what we had planned. But looking at this list of running backs, Antonio Gibson, would you take Antonio Gibson ahead of any of the running backs that are on this list? Zeke, Saquon, David Montgomery, or Breece Hall? I know that the answer is no for Ezekiel Elliott already. So being able to look at whether or not, like, does Antonio Gibson and all of the mystery surrounding that specific offense and that running back room, David Montgomery, like you talked about, has a ton of volume that's going to be in Chicago. Breece Hall, I think my big concern there is whether or not he's splitting time, how much time he's going to be splitting with Damien, help me out. What's the Michael Carter? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yep.
And so being able to go from there and look at it, I might take all of these guys over Antonio Gibson because I just feel like they have a clearer potential role to what it is that this number one running back spot would be than Antonio Gibson. So that's just a me thing. Maybe you guys feel free to come at me. The internet always does. All right. So we're going to move on and talk about Terry McLaurin. Same thing.
I got an interesting story that I'm just following here real quick. So Daniel, take it away for like 30 seconds, can you?
Yeah, I got you, man. You're working on some stuff. This is a part of it. Actually, before we do this, Presley, can we throw up some of the polls that we had from yesterday and run through some of these? We had some questions that we went through. Will Cooper Kupp be wide receiver 1 again this season? There were a lot of questions as to whether or not Justin Jefferson is going to be the guy, if Cooper Kupp is going to be able to retain that, or if someone else is going to be able to come up and potentially be the number one wide receiver here. So from that question, we're going to throw it up here on the screen. We are getting everything pulled up. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when you're live and you have stories that just break. Sometimes you just got to roll with it, man.
Right here. I'll tell you about it in a second.
Twitter poll says 78% of the audience says Cooper Kupp will not be wide receiver 1 again this season. Over 3/4 of the audience said no, which seems insane to me. That's crazy. I got to believe that Justin Jefferson is going to be the guy that they're thinking about. Who else would be the number one wide receiver other than Cooper Kupp? Devontae Adams, I guess you could look at. Deebo Samuel. There's a handful of guys there. I mean, Jamar, possibly. I just don't think Jamar gets quite enough touches. All right, let's look at the other question that we had. Who will have a better season, Juju Smith-Schuster in his new role in Kansas City or Allen Robinson in his new role with the Rams offense? This is another really tough one because you're taking 2 wide receivers that really didn't do anything last year, and being able to look at them in better offenses and be able to decide where you want to take them. Split right down the middle. Juju Smith-Schuster, 51.1%. Allen Robinson, 48.9%. I mean, this is a spot where it feels like you can't go wrong either way. I think if I had to choose, though, and this is a me thing, I would take Allen Robinson over Juju.
So this is just like how the sausage is made here. Just as we're watching this, I get some notification on something, but kind of a wild thing, not fantasy related, but sort of fantasy related. About this, the NFL was investigating the Dolphins for potential tampering violations and tanking. It all falls under the integrity of the game policy.
Correct. Yep.
They have forfeited their 2023 first round pick, 2024 third round pick. Stephen Ross, their owner, has been suspended through October 17th of 2022.
Wow.
He may not attend a league meeting prior to the annual meeting in 2023. He's been fined $1.5 million. Talk about a massive piece of news in the NFL this morning.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, don't tamper, kids.
Yeah, don't tamper. Anyways, I know that was, sorry. I just, two jobs at once was diving in. Thank you, Daniel, for taking that over.
Yeah,
what did I
buddy.
miss? Nothing important.
I'll tell you what, you missed that 75% of our audience doesn't think that Cooper Kupp is going to repeat as wide receiver 1.
Yep.
75% says no.
It's so interesting. And who do they pick? Who do they
They
think it
didn't
is
say.
instead?
They didn't say, but I'm assuming it's Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
I don't know who else it could be other than Justin Jefferson.
Or Jamar Chase, so it makes sense.
We also, who will have a better season, Juju or Allen Robinson? Split right down the middle.
Yeah, I can see that one being split. Right
it was
in the middle.
basically 50-50.
A lot of
from that
positive Allen Robinson buzz right now, right?
Yep.
And same with
Juju.
Same with, honestly, I feel like this is one of the perils of guys. Just for we've covered most of the ground here. Let me just do this real quick. Just like during the preseason, I am so thankful for beat reporters all over the league. Right? They do an incredible job. They are the ears and eyes on the ground that we can't be because we don't go to training camps. They are so immensely useful. It's hard when I see videos all over my timeline from great beat reporters and great fans who are at training camp practices to find myself like, sometimes I tap the brakes, sometimes I don't tap the brakes, right? Like I want to buy in on these videos, but I also know that like time and time again, we have shown that like it doesn't always happen, right? Like things that you see in training camp don't hold up over the course of the season. But I feel like I've seen a lot of positive Chiefs wide receivers videos, and I've seen a lot of positive Allen Robinson videos. This is a long way of saying that, like, part of me wonders, should I just shut down all Twitter videos until the season begins?
Yes.
Okay.
They're all just hype videos. Everyone is just trying to make you think that everybody is the greatest at everything.
Got it.
Which I'm into. But I don't know. Can I give you one other poll?
Please do. Give me 10 other polls.
So will Zeke finish as a top 12 running back this season? We asked. Top 12.
Top 12? Okay. What were the results?
That was in the YouTube chat. Not top 20, top 12.
Yep.
45% said yes, that they view Zeke as a potential RB1 this season.
Yeah. I mean, it always falls into that weird category. Potential? Yes. Likely? No, not for me. However, the counterpoint would be that, as we talked about earlier, Zeke is very durable. And to finish in the top 12, if you play all 17 games and you're a semi-effective running back, you've got a pretty good chance, as Zeke saw himself last year.
All right. We're going to get into some YouTube questions. You good with that?
Let's do it.
This one comes from Jerry. You can keep 1 point PPR. Who should it be? Cooper Kupp, Najee Harris, or Alvin Kamara?
He can keep one?
You can keep one.
All right, this is a really tricky one here.
1 point PPR.
Yeah, 1 point PPR. So it's a tricky Najee Harris behind Cooper Kupp. But, I get it if you're saying to yourself, I'm a little bit skeptical that Cooper Kupp can repeat at the same level of greatness. And I'm a little bit skeptical that elite running backs, that elite wide receivers are more valuable than elite running backs. So I would keep Cooper Kupp and just feel really good about having, even if he's not historical Cooper Kupp again, I think his floor is wide receiver 5. I'd feel really good about that. He's likely, running backs just have a harder job to stay on the field than wide receivers do. So I would just keep Cooper Kupp.
Okay. I think I'm with you there. Let's talk about Calpain 54 wants to know keeper league with 2 quarterbacks. Keeper league.
Okay.
2 quarterbacks. Who do you keep? Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow,
okay,
or Christian McCaffrey?
Keeper league.
You get to keep 2 of them.
You get to keep 2 of those. So
Sorry, you keep 1. I believe you keep 1, but it is a 2 quarterback league.
It's a 2 quarterback league where you keep one of those players.
Do you have to keep one of the quarterbacks, or can you keep CMC in a 2 quarterback league?
Yeah, I would keep one of those quarterbacks. It's at some point the depth falls off at quarterbacks, and that league is going to be driven by the best quarterbacks more often than not. Kyler versus Joe Burrow. I think Joe Burrow's a better quarterback. I think Kyler Murray's a better fantasy play just because of the elements of his rushing ability. Joe Burrow took off like no one has ever seen a quarterback take off late last season. But prior to that, he was more like a, low-end quarterback 1 as opposed, or like a solid quarterback 2 as opposed to, keep him over Kyler Murray, who at one point last season was the best quarterback in fantasy. I keep Kyler.
There's a lot. I really hope that Joe Burrow and that offensive line and everything can keep taking a step because that offense is going to be really fun to watch again. Yep. All right. Last question comes from Alexander Crow. What is the farthest you'd be willing to reach in the first round in terms of drafting a player versus where their ADP is? So you're talking first round player.
Yeah. I think that if I were to look at the players that I have in the top 15 for leagues, all those guys merit a top 10 pick. I know that sounds contradictory. It sounds oxymoronic, I should say. But I believe that, right? I want to say Stephon Diggs is 15th on my board. I don't know that offhand. If you took Stephon Diggs 9th, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think it's spectacular value, but Diggs could be the wide receiver 1 this year. 2 years ago, he was the best wide receiver in the league. So there's kind of a cutoff point. I'd say speaking generally, when you're following our ranks, I tend to feel that our ranks and ADP sync up more closer to the top of the board, 1. Whereas we get to round 6 or 7 and you have a wide receiver that you happen to like more. He's ranked 29th in our board, but you would take him as the 23rd receiver. I think that's more justifiable. The margin is a lot thinner between, again, just making this up off the top of my head, Hollywood Brown and Amari Cooper, right? Mm-hmm. Even if they're 5 spots apart in rankings, I think you can make a very strong case for either one of them. Meanwhile, in the first round, 5 spots behind Jonathan Taylor at running back would be Alvin Kamara. And I think going into the season, it's a pretty clear edge for Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah. I think I'm probably in that. If you're in the top half of the draft, I'm sticking fairly close to ADP just because those guys are there for a reason.
Yeah.
But if you're in that 6 to 7 through 10 to 12 range, there's, like you said, a good handful of players that I would feel going 3, 4, 5 positions ADP wise if I feel convicted about, hey, I just like Joe Mixon more than I like this player. I like DeAndre Swift, or I still believe in Devontae Adams. And if you have that conviction, I don't think them being able to move up 3 or 4 spots ADP wise is that big of a deal.
Yeah, I agree on that. I feel the same way. And the first round, generally speaking, hard to win your league in the first round, easier to lose the league in the first round. So if you're taking a player that you're reaching on, just be certain that it's not a player that you're projecting too much on. Like, I'd like to have a sample size on that player, having been elite in the past.
Totally. We're going to wrap it up, Field. Do you know who we're talking about tomorrow?
So we talked about the Cowboys and the Commanders today. I'm guessing the Giants and the Eagles
Giants and Eagles tomorrow.
Nailed it.
That's right. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. My name is Daniel Dopp. This is Field Yates.
Come on.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We'll see you guys tomorrow.